Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
And welcome back, everyone. We're going to answer some questions that many of us ponder from time to time. It surrounds funerals, cremation. Many families pre-plan just to make life easier and save some expense also at the same time. One thing is inevitable. I don't have to tell you, we're not going to be here one day. So we're going to answer some of those questions with somebody who really has those answers. And he's the president and owner of Martin A. Gleason Funeral Homes, 3 locations in the Queens, New York area. His name is John Golden, and he's back with us. Hi, John. How are you?
Good, Steve. And yourself?
Very well. Very well.
Good.
Why don't we start with what someone's rights are at passing?
Yeah.
There's guidelines, and I know
Sure.
that,
Good afternoon, everyone. As Steve mentioned,
I was just going to say it changes state by state.
Sure. Okay. So I would like to speak about a term that I've hazarded a guess that most of you listeners have never heard of, quasi-property. Quasi-property is a legal concept in reference to the funeral industry. It refers to the rights of a human body regarding the handling of a human body after death. Based on judicial decisions since this country was founded, it has been established there can be no property rights in a human body because humans cannot be owned, thus quasi-property. U.S. courts have bestowed some protections on human bodies, though some states have slight differences. All states bestow the following rights in a human body: to protect the wishes of the deceased as to their remains, give a right of disposition to the family, determine when organs can be donated, and protect the corpse from being mishandled before and after final disposition. This brings me to athlete and Olympic gold medalist Jim Thorpe. He died in 1953, and a funeral was held in his home state of Oklahoma. Unbeknownst to the rest of the family, his third wife made a deal with a town in Pennsylvania and had his body shipped there. The remains of Jim Thorpe became a famous case of quasi-property because of a family dispute over the remains. In exchange for monetary considerations, she agreed to the construction of a monument, perpetual care of the remains, a roadside attraction, and granted the towns to the right to rename themselves Jim Thorpe. In 2010, Thorpe's son Jack filed a federal lawsuit against the borough of Jim Thorpe, seeking to have his father's remains returned to his homeland. He was a Native American member of the Sac and Fox Nation, to be buried on a reservation in Oklahoma near family members. Numerous court cases ensued that ultimately saw the U.S. Supreme Court refuse to hear the matter. Ultimately, Jim Thorpe's remains continue to dwell in Pennsylvania. Another interesting case about quasi-property is an article that appeared in the New York Post in early 2014. The article told the story of a man who appeared on the A&E reality show Storage Wars. The show was popularized the concept of purchasing abandoned or repossessed storage lockers in hope of finding treasure. The network bills the show as a group of bidders looking to strike it rich by buying storage units. It's a high-stakes game that can pay off big time or leave one sifting through the equivalent of not so good trash. The article then describes how the man purchased a unit at a Harlem self-storage for $550. And when he took possession of it, found that it contained dozens of urns and other containers filled with cremated human remains. In total, the man became an owner of 31 sets of cremains and thus the responsible party. The article elucidated how the cremains came to reside there in a non-criminal way, having been moved there by a funeral home in Manhattan that went out of business, and they were paying the storage fees until the funeral director died. As a result, it made the locker eligible for purchase by an interpretive bidder. Nearing the conclusion of the article, the man reportedly had no idea what to do with the ashes. As opposed to the burial of human remains, which are largely cut and dry, aside from special cases like Jim 4, usually featuring a wake and or religious service, followed by burial and entombment in a crypt at a cemetery, cremation can be ambiguous. Cremains can be kept as one or divided. They can also be made into mementos or jewelry, which can easily be lost, stolen, or destroyed. They can be kept at home, perhaps in an urn or a mantle, or can be placed in a niche or recessed compartment in a columbarium, public storage of urns, which allow family members to visit the deceased in a designated space. The many possibilities exist. As a funeral director, it's my job to explain cremation to our families. A cremation company will require a form called the disposition of cremated remains to be filled out. This form delineates if cremains can be permanently stored in a columbarium, placed in temporary disposition for 16 months, after which a final disposition will be made, or placed in permanent storage. This can also be released to a designated person or express mail to a designated person. My funeral home also requires a customer's designation of intention form to be filled out, which inquires if the cremains intended to be buried, entombed, returned, or scattered at sea. Of note, the designee noted on this form will be the only person our funeral home will release cremains to. As far as what becomes of the cremains after they are released, sometimes they're sent to another country, picked up, brought home, placed in jewelry, scattered, or divided. Often we were asked to split cremains into multiple urns for family members, but please note that cemeteries only accept one vessel for disposition, as well as only one cremation certificate. Veteran cemeteries forbid cemeteries prevent cremains from being divided and will only accept one urn and one cremation certificate. Legally, a funeral home in New York may scatter at sea cremains that go unclaimed after 120 days from the date of cremation if this is on their disposition form. The storage bidder noted in the article could have legally disposed of his 31 cremains that way if he had it on his designation form. Proudly, I can say that my staff and I handle cremains with the highest standard of care, whether whole or divided. It's important to realize the difference between burial and cremation is that cremation is quite final, and thus painstaking efforts are undertaken from identifying the body before cremation all the way through the final disposition of the cremains to make sure the family wishes are properly managed. I hope this short discussion on quasi-property has been helpful. The Martin A. Gleason Funeral Home is happy to help with any further questions or considerations in this matter.
Interesting story along there, and also just this information we never know about. So I want to go back over a piece here. When somebody passes away, they are cremated. Who ultimately owns the remains?
The next of kin.
Okay.
There's a list of who's in charge in the city in New York State. And the first one in charge is if there's a person designated and written instrument, which would be the agent. Then after the agent would be the spouse. The domestic partner would be next. Any child 18 or older, either parent next, and any brother or sister 18 or older, authorized guardian next, then grandchildren, great-grandchildren, nieces, nephews, grandnieces, grandparents, aunts, uncles, first cousins, and it goes down from there.
And that
But
was it. That was in
whoever,
order. That was in order, correct?
that was an order, yes.
Okay. Wow, interesting. What would you do? I'm going to go hypothetical for a moment here. What if
Sure.
somebody was in the process of getting divorced and it wasn't final yet, but it was, in process? One party, one half of the couple passes. Who would be ultimately have rights to the cremains?
The married, they're still married, so therefore the
Legally.
married legally.
Right.
Yeah, would
Right.
be next.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
You must deal with all different types of family situations in what you do.
We do. Yeah, we get
Yeah.
a lot of, that's why we always advocate pre-planning. So if there's 5 children in the family and 2 want to cremate and 3 don't, and the deceased wants to be cremated, they can
Right.
name an agent, one of their children, and then they would get their wishes of being cremated. But if they don't, and 3 of the 5 children object, then they can't be cremated.
Wow. And
So
I
it's
know,
important.
yeah, pre-planning is essential. If you you don't want to put that on your family, it's already a very emotional time when somebody passes. Now, in a very short period of time, without pre-planning, now your loved ones are faced with, well, what would they want? How would they want to be honored? Then, like you said, there can be times where family doesn't agree. Um, you've mentioned agent before. Can you go over that again, just very briefly? What
Sure.
constitutes an agent?
Yeah, it's a simple form, and it designates who's in charge just for funeral arrangements only. You can name a family member, you can name a neighbor, a pastor, a minister. They're in charge of the funeral arrangements. You could put on the form, I wish to be buried at Calverton National Cemetery. I want a 1-day wake at Gleason's, and there has to be witnessed by 2 people. It doesn't have to be notarized. And then we take a copy for the pre-arrangement file, and the family, the agent has to sign approval that they accept the appointment. And they can even name a backup agent in case the agent passes away. So you have 2 people that would, in other words, the main agent would be in charge if they're still alive. And if for any reason they're deceased, and the second agent is in charge. And it's a way of assuring that the deceased wishes are followed at the time of death.
So I'm going to look at this in a different way now. What if an agent was designated and it was at a funeral home on the East Coast, but now the person died on the West Coast where most of the family was, but they're unaware that an agent form was signed in another part of the country. Is that trackable at all? Or you have to know.
Well, the agent form, New York law is about the agent. Now, we would have to check in other states if somebody dies in California and they're coming back to New York, it's not a problem. We can take care of everything, have the deceased shipped back to New York, and use the agent form to take care of. But if they're going to be wake, say, in California, they would have to follow California law at the time.
Okay.
But another thing they can do is also put it in their will, their wishes too. But the agent form, the will, the executrix or executor isn't appointed until the will is probated, and that could take 6 months to a year. But the agent takes precedent immediately,
Hmm.
upon death.
Interesting to learn what you said, John, in that if the wake or ceremony takes place in California, now it's all under their jurisdiction, as opposed to if you just wanted the body shipped to New York, where let's say maybe the agent form was filled out. Um, it's transportation at that point, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Correct.
Hmm.
Yeah.
When we talk about cremation, and cremation in the last, I want to say maybe 10 years has gotten much more popular.
Yes.
What are some things that we should understand? Maybe some myths about it. Any things that you can share, just kind of things that people ask you.
Well, a lot of people don't realize you can have a wake with the guest of honor present. You can have a funeral service with the guest of honor present. You can have a church service. And then after the church service, then you can cremate. And it takes, usually about a week to get the cremains back from the crematory. And then the family can plan to bury the cremains once they're back, or, decide what they want. Some families take 6 months to decide. They take the cremains home, and, you know, there's all options available to them. They can purchase a niche at a crematory. They can purchase a grave at a cemetery. If they're veterans, the veteran can be buried at the cemetery, the cremains, and his spouse also. Or even in a wall, they have walls at the veteran cemetery that the veterans can be entombed in the wall also, and their spouse. And they provide a headstone if they're buried.
Or when you're saying if somebody's cremated, they can be interred, just like somebody just being buried.
Right, except it's a little smaller container.
Sure.
Uh,
Does it change the plot when somebody's cremains are placed there in terms of size, or is a plot is a plot?
well, a plot's a plot, but some cemeteries say that the cremains take up a space just like a burial, and other cemeteries will let you use like 4 or 5 sets of cremains in the grave and not only count it as one burial. But some cemeteries say no, it takes up a spot. It's just like a burial.
Sure.
And if you have room for 2 people after this, you'd only have room for one.
Hey, interesting. I never knew that. So thanks for sharing that. See,
Yeah,
the things you learn just by asking questions of a professional.
sure.
Any other cremation thoughts? Since we're centering on it, I'm trying to think of things that in my circle people have thought. My mom was cremated, and was just it was her choice, and of course we honor her
Right.
choice, and that's perfectly fine.
Of
Um,
course. Sure.
didn't do a burial in that instance. And what you said earlier, uh, the cremains can be placed in lockets and different types of mementos.
Yeah.
So it's really what your belief is, and I think there's a misconception that, oh well, we're minimizing honoring them with a cremation because there's not going to be a casket. It's not going to be a full ceremony. But it can be just like that. The only difference is they were cremated, correct?
Yes, we just had one at Calverton National Cemetery, a military hero that had a Purple Heart, was cremated. His cremains uh, were, they got full military honors, a bugler, and it was very nice. And they had about, I'd say, 40 motorcycles from the Patriot Group
Wow.
that showed up, and they had about 12 to 15 members of the VFW carried American flags at the site, and it honored the deceased, and it was a beautiful ceremony.
Wow. Wow. It sounds special.
Yeah.
What about some of the things that somebody can purchase or get to honor someone? Of course, it's forever. There's been prayer cards, or maybe they're called mass cards. I forget.
Yeah,
Um,
prayer cards can be laminated, personalized with the picture of the deceased on it. A family can write a poem or pick out a prayer.
sure,
Uh,
sure.
you can, they also have medallions now, beloved mother, grandmother. They have American flag medallions. They have corners on caskets now. Like if they're golfers, you could put a golf corner on it. If you're a veteran, you could put the branch of service, Marines, Army, Navy. If you're a gardener, they have a gardener corner. There's many options to use. Cremation, they have personal urns. You can engrave the name, the dates, a symbol if you wish. And we have many options for families to honor their loved ones.
What are some of the other things that not even just cremation centered, but some of the other mementos, memories, special things that somebody might want to add?
Yeah, a lot of families do a video tribute, and they put it on an SD card, and during the wake, they display it on a TV screen. And it gets the family and friends talking about the deceased in a more pleasant way when they were younger. And they start to tell stories during the wake, which helps, the family grieve. And it's a nice tribute to do. Flowers can be personalized. We've had, sometimes if they're motorcycle riders, there's a flower in the shape of a motorcycle. A Yankee fan, there's a flower piece with the Yankee symbol on it, or the Met symbol. Football, they may hang a jersey of their favorite player in the room on a table next to the casket. And these are all available to do, and families really appreciate it.
It's times have changed. It's when funerals used to be just something you had to do. Of course, you need to logistically, but also to the memories of somebody and to celebrate someone. But it's turned into more of a celebration, in my view, celebrating somebody's life.
Yes, it's definitely a celebration of life more now than ever. And all these, whatever helps the family feel better is a great thing, and we encourage it.
Sure. And you're there to help along the way at the 3 homes you have. What are the locations of those, John?
We have one in Flushing on Northern Boulevard and 149th Place with a large parking lot. One in Bayside on Bell Boulevard and 38th Avenue, and one in Whitestone on 150th Street and 11th Avenue. And all 3 have large parking lots and viewing rooms.
And helping families isn't something new to the Gleason, the history there.
1913, the Gleason Funeral Home's been helping families.
Wow.
They're in the hardest time of their lives.
Well, it's families helping families. And John, I appreciate you helping us understand more today. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.